Floyd's what I would call a mama's boy. I could tell from the minute I met him. And when he came back from Houston, he seemed kind of like a shell of himself.
Testimony today from George Floyd's girlfriend, Courtney Ross, describing Floyd's grief after losing his mother. Ross also described how they both struggled with opioid addiction.
We both suffered from chronic pain. Mine was in my neck and his was in his back. We got addicted and tried really hard to break that addiction many times.
Derek Smith, one of the first paramedics responded to the scene, testified that when he arrived, 3 officers were on top of George Floyd. He was also asked about George Floyd's condition.
I did not palpate a pulse.
When you say palpate, is that you didn't feel or detect a pulse?
I did not detect a pulse.
And what did his condition appear to be to you overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead.
As I mentioned, the esteemed lawyer Paul Butler has agreed to stay with us to take some questions in this segment. Paul, how strong a witness was George Floyd's girlfriend? And let me go ahead and mention this. Opioid addiction may have been a showstopper in a trial 30 years ago. In 2021, I don't think it's possible to find an American family, if not with a direct connection, then a tangential connection to this scourge every American has dealt with at some point.
Absolutely right, Brian. So Chauvin's defense is literally that he did not kill George Floyd. The claim is that Floyd died of a drug overdose and his pre-existing medical conditions. So the testimony of Ms. Ross allowed the jury first to hear from the prosecution about Floyd's struggle with addiction. So when the defense makes a big deal about this, it won't seem like a bad fact that the prosecution was hiding. And as you know, Ms. Ross really put a human face on the opiate addiction struggle that she and Mr. Floyd share with many Americans. And she also established that Floyd had a high tolerance for drugs, which prosecutors will use to rebut the defense theory that he overdosed.
I want to play for you a supervising sergeant, which is somewhat redundant, testified today about the use of force. Let me play that exchange, Paul. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Sir, based on your review of the body-worn camera footage, do you have an opinion as to when the restraint of Mr. Floyd should have ended in this encounter?
Yes.
What is it?
When Mr. Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended the restraint.
And that was after he was handcuffed and on the ground and no longer resistant?
Correct.
How important was that moment, that exchange from today?
It was vital for the prosecution. Chauvin's use of force after Mr. Floyd was in handcuffs violated department policy. Brian, for 2 minutes after Chauvin knew that Floyd did not have a pulse, he kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. It will be hard for the defense to make the case that that's reasonable force. The supervisor also testified that Chauvin didn't originally tell him that he had put his knee on Floyd's neck. And when he did admit it, he didn't say how long. So lawyers call that consciousness of guilt. And finally, he testified that officers are trained that it's dangerous to leave a suspect on his back or stomach for a long time. It can cause what the sergeant called positional asphyxia that compromises breathing. So prosecutors are going to use that testimony to advance their claim that Chauvin's acts were the cause of Floyd's death, and also to demonstrate the recklessness that's required to convict Chauvin of third-degree murder.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.